Hello and welcome to GovFocus. I'm Sylvia Oakland. Federal agencies are modernizing contact centers to strengthen national security missions while improving call routing and the customer experience. My guests and I are going to talk about modernization without disrupting services, how data can enable predictive decision-making, and of course, where AI and automation fit into the contact center experience. Today, I'm joined by the FBI's Tim Ferguson and Maximus's Evan Davis. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. Good to see you, Tim.
Tim, I thought it was a really fascinating read after I went through and read the Criminal Justice Information Service Division Year in Review. There's a lot of good stuff in there, including the efforts talking about the 2030 strategy and how you guys are going to get there. So I'd like to start off and talk about how is the FBI modernizing legacy systems and connecting that multi-channel data?
So some of the things that we're looking at is obviously as many companies are out there doing the same thing in the private sector as well as the government sector, moving away from on-prem solutions. So when we talk about modernizing legacy systems, the first thing we look at is how we move into a cloud-based solution. Because as we all know, cloud-based solutions provide more analytics, they provide faster response, things of that nature. And of course, it also, we think about the government and how we're trying to reduce excessive spending. We're able to get rid of the on-prem solutions and data centers and move towards a modernized cloud environment to enhance that user experience. And when we take a look at what the CJIS division has, we have a lot of data that we sit on here because we work and we service 19,000 law enforcement agencies across the country in the law enforcement setting, as well as across the globe, because we provide support to our legal attaches, our law enforcement attaches globally, as well as to the public. And so we have several disparate systems that we sit on top of. And so the question is, what we're working towards and we're moving towards in our 2030 strategy and in our IT philosophy is how we can have potentially a single sign-on, a single entry point into all of these systems so that an individual user could request, using a biographic search and be able to pull from all of these different systems in a kind of a data mesh type solution to get that information at their fingertips when, where, and how they need it. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're able to provide that information to whoever is needing that information. And then that's the other thing when we talk about data mesh. Something that we also have to consider too is, how are we ingesting information? It's not really feasible. One of our systems, I'll back up and say one of our systems is the National Data Exchange, which sits on approximately 2 billion searchable offense reports from across the country and several different agencies, about 8,500 different agencies across the country. Right now, we have a central repository for that, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for us to continue to build those repositories, although storage costs have gone down quite a bit. The question is, how do we let data live where the data is and make it accessible to those who need it? And so those are the things that I think we kind of struggle with, I think, as an agency, and I think really across national security and the law enforcement components is how do we get access to that information while letting the data live where it's at right now? So those are some of the things that we're looking at for the future, but how we're modernizing it now is really looking towards cloud-based technologies.
Thank you. And I want to stick with you just for a moment, Tim. And that's kind of talking about, more on this customer experience side. We heard a little bit about that technical aspect, but how has these information sharing efforts, as you described, removing some of those data silos and moving to the cloud, impact the public experience, but also, like you mentioned, the law enforcement experience, since you're working with both of those user groups?
So when we take a look at the different customer bases we have, I have them in kind of two different buckets. When we look at the general public, so the CJIS division, we do all of the gun background checks, or for most of the gun background checks across the country, and then our systems are used for all gun background checks. Right now, what we do, we maintain a 94% immediate determination rate, and what that means is that 94% of the time when a person is attempting to purchase a firearm, that transaction is adjudicated within 15 minutes or less. And then we also, within the customer bucket of the American public, we provide services to those who are applying for positions of public trust by conducting those background checks and fingerprint-based background checks, and then also providing services to the general public when it comes to reporting tips to the FBI. So again, when we talk about user experience, and we'll talk a little bit later about how we're using automation and AI to enhance those experiences, but we have this customer first mentality here in the division. Now, looking at the law enforcement perspective, we have so many different tools that are available to law enforcement. And think about this: every time an individual gets stopped by the police, or the police are running some kind of a check on someone who's on the side of the road, or they come in contact with someone, they're searching our systems. 10 million times a day, the National Crime Information Center is searched by law enforcement. So when we talk about the modernization of the data, the question is, how do we get that information to the customers as quickly as possible and as comprehensive as possible without overwhelming them with information that they don't need specific to their jobs? As I mentioned before, we get queried 10 million times a day in the National Crime Information Center. Our response time for NCIC in response back to law enforcement now is 6 milliseconds in order to get that information back. And that is a direct result of how we modernize that information, how we get it into the cloud. So we're providing those services quicker and faster to those individuals who need that information. Because when we talk about what we're doing and who our customer is, on the law enforcement side, we're really talking about life and death. We're talking about whether or not those officers are able to get the information to make the best decision possible and go home safe to their families at night. And when it comes to the customers that are on the public side, all of us have been on, a phone call when we're trying to get a hold of a federal agency to try to get information. We know sometimes how difficult that can be. And what I want people to walk away from when they communicate with the FBI is to walk away with an experience to think, that was a great experience that I had with the federal government. That was a great experience I had with the FBI, because as I tell my folks here, sometimes this is going to be the only time a person from the general public ever interacts with the FBI. And so what experience do we want them to have when they walk away from that? And so when we talk about modernization and enhancing our call center experiences, it's really about keeping that customer centricity at mind with all of the things that we do. And so when we plan together, we work together, we're always thinking about the person who's on the other end of that phone call or at the other end of that system who needs that information to either be safe or to handle whatever situation that they're trying to handle.
Of course. And it really does come down to that security at the end of the day and how we can use that customer experience to drive that. And Evan, that's where I'd like to hear your perspective on this. It's something that I'm increasingly hearing as I cover more things, especially within the cyber realm. But why are we equating good customer service with good security measures?
That's a fantastic question, Sylvia. I want to start by hitting on something Tim just said that I think is both incredibly important to hear, but also to know that I hear and experience it across dozens of different agencies, and that's the sort of dialogue and comparison that Tim laid out between what a customer experiences in a one-off, one-on-one setting, that for the vast majority of government agencies' customers, their interaction, their total interaction with that agency is very limited and is often seeking information about something they don't know a lot about. They're entering into a new space, right? Whether it's law enforcement officers seeking additional information from a nationwide source of data, whether it's folks inquiring about tax code or about Medicare benefits, right? They're almost always entering into a space where they're not as fluent and they don't have as much information as the agency that they're reaching out to. But on the other hand, the agency, like Tim's, is dealing with that, but in the millions and in the tens of millions. So how do you reconcile doing at scale what is expected from a customer one-on-one? And that's where I think Tim's already hit on the really optimistic part of the modernization journey that so many agencies are on right now. And that's that in addition, but by going to these cloud-based services and going to a tighter form of integration, that not only are they getting the cost efficiencies that he referenced and the availability across different channels that he referenced, but it really becomes about the data. Because the beauty of having the data, not only the data that the customer is seeking, but data about the customer experience itself, means that that one-off experience, while it's new to maybe a rookie law enforcement officer or to someone turning 65, it's not new to the agency. The agency has experienced that encounter tens of thousands or tens of millions of times. And that data, using it well and pulling it together from multiple sources to understand the entire scope of the customer experience, allows for far more what we call predictive pathing, allows for ensuring, as Tim said, that the caller, the customer, is getting exactly the information that's going to be helpful for them, that it's given to them in a context that will make sense and is actionable, because, as he said, lives and livelihoods are often on the line when dealing with federal missions. But also expects and predicts what's going to be coming next for them. Don't forget that after this call, you're going to need Y, you're going to need Z. How about I get you, how about I send you the right information to ensure that the entirety of this process goes smoothly and cleanly for you and leaves you with that impression that Tim was talking about.
To build on that a little bit, just because I know you're getting ready to get into the cybersecurity aspect, and those questions that come to us and information that is requested to us millions of times a day contains a lot of PII, contains information that is very sacred to the folks who are submitting it, and quite frankly, sacred to all of us who work in this space to make sure that we're protecting the privacy of those that we serve. And so, like I mentioned, I know you're getting ready to get into the cybersecurity piece of it, but really that's baked into everything that we do, because the information we have that we're giving out and trying to do it in a efficient way is I wouldn't say not necessarily secret, but it is protected information, and we have to be careful with that.
Spot on. And in addition to the protection of PII, of, in some cases, medical information, in some cases, financial information, personal information, criminal background information, that necessity of baking in security to every aspect, especially for this service delivery contact center world that we're talking about, that first point of contact is also incredibly critical, because that first point of contact is also the government's and taxpayers' first and primary line of defense against fraud. That across agencies, that there still remain opportunities for fraud and waste and improper payments and improper disclosure of information, and we've come to an understanding throughout the industry and throughout the government that, particularly in the areas of fraud and improper payments, that fraud recovery is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive. That bringing all of those tool sets and channels into the same core foundational tools ensures that the security you put forth is going to be applicable regardless of channels and regardless of the evolutions in security. It gives you one place to drive that defensive posture and say, we know that we've identified the 4 or 6 ways that someone can request information or access information or submit forms and information. And we can ensure that the appropriate security layer is placed on top of each of those, and that if you can maintain it, just like you want to do with data, just like you want to do with knowledge management, that if you can maintain that as a single layer, then you can ensure that as you change to adapt to fraudulent behaviors and to adapt to new technologies that empower improper payments and empower the disclosure of information, that you're able to do that swiftly and appropriately across all channels without leaving any holes.
That leads me to the next question of what can agencies do then to turn all of this data that they're getting, like you were talking about before, to provide a better customer experience and to have a little bit more of just proactive intelligence about how their agency operates? Evan, do you mind starting off? And Tim, I'd love to get your perspective after as well.
it is a massive question of prioritization. You can't conquer all of it at once, right? You can't boil the ocean when it comes to improving customer experience. We've seen agencies try over and over again over the in my case over the last 25 years to bring in a new tool and say it's going to address every problem, and then be disappointed when their hopes don't work out, because there are lots of problems and lots of complexities that come with dealing with, as we described, those one-on-one situations. So the trick is to collect as much data as possible about why your customers are reaching out, what they actually need, and then use the intelligence behind the data to find ways to intelligently group them and to prioritize and weight those groupings and say, we've seen a significant number of our callers reaching out about problem X. And there are a couple variations on that, but at its heart, we understand this core need. And then examine that high priority, high volume core need and drive through which experiences that your customers have had with that need have been positive, which have been negative, which from a data standpoint which results are statistically correlated to the kind of success you're hoping to have. And that ties back to your core agency missions and your agency goals. It allows your CX environment to trace directly back to mission and directly back to agency objectives. And by looking at the data that's available now and asking, what kind of results am I hoping to accomplish here? And which paths that we've experienced in the past, or which paths could we envision that get people closer to that goal, right? That might mean things like reducing the need for repeat callers, right? It might mean reducing the need for unnecessary transfers, ensuring that whatever path someone is pushed toward is a path that can definitively fully resolve the concern or the question in front of them. Tim, anything you'd like to add?
No, that's great. And I think I want to hit on something you said earlier, which is prioritization, because I think that's where an agency like mine, where we have so many different customers, a huge customer base across different missions that they're in between the public and the law enforcement. And then the question is not only just the prioritization piece of it, is how do you avoid making changes in a process that doesn't affect someone else down the line? And so the CGIS division recently, over the course of the last year and a half or so, has undergone a transformational change that I think is transformational to not only the FBI, but definitely to this division when it comes to business agility. So we've adopted a new framework, and it's not new to the private sector, but the scaled agile framework to make sure that we're more agile and that we're taking teams of people with our information technology folks and our business line folks to sit together and to plan. Because, this, as mentioned before, it's like we need to figure out what is it that we're getting a lot of calls about. How do we become more efficient, and how are we interacting with those that are people that are our customers? And so we have that customer centricity mindset, and we also have individuals that are part of that business line team that communicate with the folks that are our customers and communicate with our IT folks. So they sit down together and they say, okay, now that we know, here's the different things that we need to do. How do we prioritize those and get them into production as quickly as possible? And then how do we figure out how this is going to affect other people that we work with? The CGIS division is the largest in the FBI. We have almost 3,000 employees here, and we have a lot of different mission sets that we do. And so, a call that may come in may affect something we do over on our biometric services. So if you make changes in that process, we got to make sure that it doesn't detrimentally affect what's going on our biometrics piece of it. And so there's that thought process and that transformational change that we're undergoing right now to make sure that we're having these people that are working together, planning together, talking to each other, and making sure that we don't make detrimental changes to the experiences on either side.
Yeah, I'd love to jump on that for a second, because that shows such a maturity around this modernization journey, and it's a recognition of the fact that those downstream impacts are very real and are felt throughout government agencies, and not only can stay within the FBI, within your group, but can certainly cross agency boundaries, right? That actions taken by one can impact the other, especially when you look to core-related agencies like Medicare and Social Security, right? Where people are going to have those mixed questions. So that kind of collaboration around solutioning and a scaled agile framework approach to resolving those can be so important. One of the things that many agencies, especially those that are newer in their current modernization journey, are learning right now is that many of their calls, many of their encounters, and certainly many of their complex ones are sort of a double-edged sword, are self-inflicted. And so the bad news is it's not the best look. The good news is self-inflicted means completely fixable. You can imagine that the way in which a form or a letter is sent out by the government, that the clarity or lack thereof, or the specific language used, or the clarity around exact next steps that ought to be taken, can make an enormous impact on whether and how often those recipients then feel driven to reach out and call and ask follow-up questions.
We've been talking about data, and when I think about data and change management, a lot of things that are in the headlines right now are AI. And I'm excited to talk about this as well because I think we see a lot of potential for AI, or more specifically automation, to really help either with routing or to help answer some of those really repeat questions that some of your customers may be asking. And so, Tim, I'd like to start with you to talk about how you're integrating AI and automation, and again, how that is leading to your modernization strategy for 2030, and of course, keeping in mind the security of it all.
Absolutely. I love talking about this, especially because I've been in the government long enough to know that AI used to be a four-letter word. And so here we are now. We're talking about how we're using AI and automation to make ourselves better. And really, when you in a law enforcement context, when I look at it, I mean, I've been an FBI agent for 24 years, and I look at things and I think to myself, if the bad guy's using it, is there something that I can do to use it as well to enhance investigations to counteract how the bad guys are using it? But when we talk about here in the CJIS context, it's a lot more about the business process. I mentioned before the 94% immediate determination rate for gun background checks, that in 15 minutes or less, 94% of those gun transactions are adjudicated. And that is thanks to automation. In addition to that, 25% of what used to be transferred to a person to a manual check through automation has now enabled us to adjudicate those immediately. So when you think about just very quickly, the gun background checks, there's 10 federal prohibitors and there's over 700 state prohibitors. So it's very complex, and we have to make sure that the system is able to recognize, and there's a lot of nuances because when we talk about data quality, part of the issue that we have right now across the entire spectrum of law enforcement is some of the data is not very good. And so when you look at trying to find dispositions for criminal activities, convictions or whatever, and if they're not there, it's hard for us to make a gun transaction adjudication because we don't have the information available to us. So then we have to reach out and try to get that information. But that's how we use it. We're using it in the NICS business process type work with again, that 25% that has already saved millions of dollars in man hours to be able to make those decisions. And when we take a look at the National Threat Operations Center, which receives over 5,500 calls and e-tips every single day, the question is, how can we make sure that we're taking those tips that are the most that present the highest level of threat, and we're actioning those as quickly as possible? So we use threat sensing algorithms to take that information and bring it to the top. So an examiner is looking at those right away, particularly if they're written e-tips, so we can make sure that we're actioning those tips as soon as they come in. And when I take a look at how we're using automation and AI, I think I look at it kind of in the sense that I want to figure out how to make what we're doing more efficient before I start kind of pushing it out to how it faces externally, if that makes sense, because I want to make sure it works. I want to have an operational environment here internally, and use that AI to enhance the efficiency and the efficacy of the individuals that are here, and then push it out to how it affects the person who is coming in through our customer experience. As a couple of examples of that. So when the call comes in, right now we're using transcription services, and so an examiner could be talking to someone for 10 or 15 minutes. That call is then transcribed. The notes for the examiner are then transcribed into a legal document that the person reviews, and it makes it so much quicker because when you think about it, customer experience, right? We're trying to handle all the flood of calls that come in. And we talk about national events. We have hundreds, if not thousands, more calls than we normally do on a daily basis because of national events. So we want the examiners to be able to have that information quicker, be able to look at it, make sure it's accurate, and then be able to submit that document to whatever law enforcement agency needs it. So we think about the efficacy in that manner. And then now let's talk about the customer experience. If we're experiencing a high volume of calls, one of the things that we've just introduced recently using AI is for the individual caller to be able to press a button on their phone, and they will receive a text message with the tips.fbi.gov website where they can go in and file an electronic tip. Again, trying to make sure that they're not having to sit on the phone for a long period of time, but be able to submit that information to the FBI, how they need it and when they need it, so that we're improving that customer experience. Because at the end of the day, we only have so many people here in the division. We're a federal agency. All federal agencies are bound by budgets, personnel resources, things of that nature. So we have to become as efficient as we can with what we have. I think it's so very important for all agencies to look at how they can use automation and AI to enhance their customer experiences. And hopefully, it seems like there's been a kind of a change in that. I know the administration has put a lot of focus on AI and how we can use it across particularly the executive branches. And so I'm really hoping that we're going down that path. And so we're always looking at new and emerging technologies. We're working with industry partners. Every year we have an industry day here where we invite partners to come in and we talk about kind of our overarching vision of where we see the division going, some of our strategy items, so that we can kind of help the industry understand where we're trying to go. So that when they come to us with solutions, they already know where we're going, where we're headed. And it makes it a whole lot easier, streamlines that process and makes it easier for us to work with industry to solve some of the more complex problems that we have in the national security and law enforcement context.
Tim did a fantastic job of distilling down appropriate and responsible use of AI and automation to very concrete examples within the FBI. Nationwide and across agencies, I would say largely the same thing. That there are certainly three major areas in this space where it's already being put to responsible use with really excellent results, and Tim walked through them. Right, the first is in internal processes, is in the automation of those steps behind the scenes that go through form processing, that go through manipulation and integration between records and so on. The second is in data insights, that we've already talked so much this afternoon about the criticality of that prioritization. And that's great, but there's an awful lot of data out there. And agencies have a drive and a desire right now to move quickly on their modernization process and begin trying things and begin making substantial improvements. And there can be a roadblock there in the analysis and the understanding of that data. AI and automation play an enormous role in tracking large amounts of not just quantitative but qualitative data and providing potential insights for human-based intelligence and for analysts to review and process and make recommendations. And the third that Tim pointed to is that touch into the external customer-facing space. And that, of course, is one of the areas where agencies need to be incredibly prudent and incredibly careful. Not just because of the security concerns around what AI might choose, but also because of the criticality and mission of delivering correct, accurate, and up-to-date information to customers, both for customer experience and for the fulfillment of agency goals. And so in that space, certainly the area that we found most applicable is in that key understanding of customer need, of customer intent. That whether it's the review of transcripts or whether it's through intelligent voice assistants up front, the ability to quickly assess based on millions of other encounters, to quickly assess the deep needs and if necessary, ask in natural language qualifying questions to drive down to the real need of a customer and identify exactly what is probably the most prudent or appropriate path for them to take next, and then really cut it off, right? And then allow that pathing part to be more scripted, to be more codified, because those paths often require the delivery of information. That delivery information is often policy based or legislation based and needs to be precise and exact and based on specific and reliable sources.
And if I could just add too, I think you talked about legislative. That just kind of struck a chord with me because when we talk about AI and the use of AI and automation, there has to be a strong governance around it. And I think one of the things that the FBI is doing is we have a board that reviews AI use cases because we have 38,000, 40,000 employees nationwide, or actually globally, that are looking for ways to come up with creative solutions. And there are a lot of solutions that are out there. And it's never ill intent. It's just people trying to solve problems. And so what we have to do is have a good, solid core of individuals who are reviewing all use cases, making sure that we're able to articulate it, making sure we have the appropriate authorities to operate, working with the department, working with Congress because we have congressional oversight, and really, quite frankly, the American public, so that when the question comes, how are you using it? We can say, this is how we're using it, so that all that information is transparent, because I do believe that transparency is important, and I believe governance is important, and I think that we're doing it right at this time.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion. That is unfortunately all the time that we have for today. Tim and Evan, thank you both so much for sharing how both government and industry are working to improve that customer experience while also making sure our national security efforts are still in place.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sylvia.